Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 139th edition of the Frank and Stan Chat. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that one of our guests that's previously had some of the highest viewing figures in the history of Frank and Stan Chat is back with us this week. So hello, Nick Atherton.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Stan. It's great to be back.
Yeah, lovely to have you. You're sitting in an office in Stockport, I believe.
That's right. The Natural Dimensions has an office on Marketplace, so you can go out of the office and into the old part of Stockport and enjoy the wonderful environment around the old town and the market hall.
It's all being done up, isn't it? It's quite a lot of money being spent on the market. Yeah.
Yeah, the market. I mean, the market's flourishing at the moment. Underbank has got a kind of regeneration scheme that's about to be implemented, and but I mean, it's already a really nice place to go shopping, and there's quite a vibrant economy happening and developing along it. But I think that kind of a lot of the buildings are getting regenerated, and occupancy is good, and they're redoing the streetscape along it to sort of enhance the kind of old town characteristics and make it even more attractive. So yeah, it's exciting times.
What a shame we're not sponsored by Stockport Council. That's all I say.
It's a shame. Maybe that's a conversation.
Anyway, how are you, Stan?
I'm okay. I'm just worried that it's snow forecast for today. I thought we were through the winter. I thought it was the first day of spring, wasn't it, the other day?
Hey, Nick, have you played cricket in the snow? Because that's how Nick and I know each other.
I've played cricket in the snow. I remember a very memorable game at Hyde, which is one of the highest cricket grounds in the country. And it was a year, we had a guy, an Aussie, playing. It was one of his first matches. And he was like, yeah, he just couldn't believe what was happening. He said, I've seen it all now.
But to give you some idea where Hyde is, it's out on the edge of the Peak District, isn't it? But it actually, when you're up at that ground, you can see the whole of the Manchester landscape. You know, you are very high up there.
Yeah. It was great. It was a snow flurry for about half an hour.
Yeah,
and we just carried on.
We did some schoolboy football up in Hyde, and in one game, when a blizzard came across, I mean, there's only 11-year-olds. They were all, both teams, clustered in a group. The ball was somewhere else, and no child would leave the cluster to go and pick the ball.
Like sheep hiding underneath the tree in a blizzard. Oh dear. Right. Okay. Right, Nick, you've been a guest before, but it'd be useful if you could just sort of let everybody know, what you do and the stuff you're interested in.
So I run a landscape architecture business, which deals with the design of outdoor space. And that could be outdoor space along in new residential developments or highways or private gardens. And recently we've become increasingly involved in school design. So we've recently completed a design for a new school which was designed to comply with biophilic principles. So the outdoor space was integral to the experience of the students and their learning experience. And we have just started a new project on another school in Warwick, which will be being designed according to similar kind of principles. So there's a growing kind of momentum towards incorporating natural play and nature and natural environments as part of the school experience.
So how did you get involved in this then, Nick?
In that particular project?
Well, no. How did you? Well, both things, I suppose. Well, I don't think you started your career thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be a landscape architect." Did you?
No, I thought I was going to be an international cricket player, but that didn't pan out. But no, I mean, it's weird because I mean, like environmental issues were, coming to the fore in the 90s. And I thought, you know, I thought it was a kind of no-brainer that people need to start pay attention to it. And the reason why I went into landscape architecture to try it is because it keyed into the kind of set of values that I had, and I wanted to do something that was positive. And I, you know, as a student, we went to some good practice examples of regeneration that was happening in Holland and Germany, and we thought this kind of thing that would be happening quite soon in the UK, but it's taken quite a long time before I suddenly started to realise how it was.
So, go on, Stan.
I was just saying, Nick, you know, you talk about their designs for new schools. Do you also do designs for schools who've got an existing layout so that they can improve it?
I generally get involved. The business tends to get involved with new development, but I've got some pointers towards what schools can do, and Stan can tell me when a good time to sort of talk about that.
We'll do it now. Yeah, I mean, because before we were chatting before, is that Stan and I know of a school called New Islington, which is in Ardwick, which I think is a school that Stan has had some involvement with. And when I visited that school, there was, you know, sort of like, it was fairly barren. I remember that I seem to think that a lot of the waste from the build had actually just been piled up as a pile of rubbish, a pile of soil alongside what was quite a small playground. And it was, you know, it was ripe for development, that in terms of thinking about what could the landscape actually look like there. And we were chatting before about, you know, there are some areas in that school where they've used artificial grass, I believe, because it's very, very heavy usage. And we were chatting to Nick about, you know, is there a place for artificial grass at all in the? Look at his face. Look,
it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. I think in play areas. I mean, the thing is, like, the worst thing you can have is just a sea of tarmac, really. So I've seen quite good examples of play areas where there've been banks and mounding, and because of the amount of footfall you get, it's impossible to have a consistent kind of sward of grass growing when kids are just running up and down it. So, you know, next to a slide down a bank, I've seen a bank of artificial grass, and it works. It's, you know, it's absolutely fine because the kids are just
I have to say
around it.
That they developed the grounds all around the school. It's completely different ethos outside than it was when I first visited it. It was just the grey playground, and the children ran about, and behaviour wasn't very good because they were running into each other. And now there are lots of activities and lots of developments in the ground that give the children something to focus on and something to do. So I do think the school's done well. The head teacher's done miraculously with the outside area from what she inherited.
Yeah, I mean, the research shows that, you know, natural environments changes behavior and changes moods of children, so it improves sociability and cooperation, amongst other things, whereas hard urban landscapes tends to kind of increase aggression and lack of sociability.
Yeah. So some of these projects, then, if the school, it's fantastic that New Islington have been able to do it, because, to be honest, that must be a massive challenge, you know, and it's great to see that that's improved. But if a head teacher or a teacher wanted to do something about what appeared to be sort of quite a barren area, you know, is it going to cost a lot of money? Is it something you're going to have to spend, you know, many years, you know, trying to resolve?
Well, I think there's small scale interventions that you can start to incorporate that aren't going to, you know, cost the earth. So there's things which you can, small bits and pieces that you can start to add on that eventually will make a bigger impact. So, for instance, one of the principles that we had at the school down in Surrey was to have a kind of strong green backdrop to the school classroom. So there's this kind of constant sense of greenery, and you can do that by if you've got a kind of sea of tarmac type play area, you can start to break up the edges of the tarmac and incorporate just even a metre wide green edge between, say, the tarmac and the perimeter fence, and incorporate planting or just throw some seed into it. And then that could be used as a drainage solution as well. So one of the new requirements for development that's coming in 2024 is mandatory SUDS, which is sustainable urban drainage systems. So which is a way of percolating water through greenery before it goes into a pipe that goes into the sewer network. So it slows everything down instead of having these big gushes of water that flood, the local streams and rivers. That, having a green edge to a background, to a playground or a tarmac area is really useful. You can incorporate quite easily planting pots and raised planters, which can be bought quite cheaply. You can get plastic pots or clay pots, and different plants like different types of pots because the thermal kind of nature of different materials is different. And you can sort of use a variety of different types of pots to create different color and size as well. So bigger pots, you can start to put bigger plants in. You could have growing areas, so you can break up tarmac and just allow water to drain through it, and then put a kind of log system around it. So you can have a small allotment area. You can even, within a very small area, have a pocket of woodland. I know that sounds crazy, but if you just have 3 meters by 4 meters, break it up and you start putting small saplings in, which cost about 50p a go, that woodland can start to grow as the child kind of journeys, as is at the school over 6-7 years. You can have a green roof. You can have a small kind of table, which is only sort of 2 meters by 2 meters, and put sedum carpet on it. And that, you don't have to break up any tarmac, but you can just have that in a corner maybe, and just watch how little growing medium certain plants need to survive and develop and grow. You could put a green wall in. There's quite cheap green wall solutions now, which you can almost like pin onto brickwork, and they're just like little pockets that sit against the brickwork, and you can put plants into them in small kind of 2-litre little pockets. You can even start to incorporate drainage from the roof that goes through the green wall and naturally kind of waters the green wall when it rains. You can incorporate nature play, so there's a lot more kind of thought about exploratory play as opposed to just having a kind of just a simple kind of seesaw. There's play which encourages kids to be creative in a kind of natural environment. So that
I have to say this story. I mean, there are 2 things in my mind as soon as you're talking here. Our youngest grandson, I'll give him a shout out, Marlo, he's going to a new nursery, and he's got it's a forest club type thing.
Forest school, yeah.
And he made a bow and arrow with his helper, and he's called Stan. And he was so made up, but it was a sense of adventure as well that he's getting from this nursery that he didn't quite get from the other one. But also a shout out to Rebecca Smith, who's been a guest here before, because she took on a secondary school in North Manchester that had exactly this central courtyard, which was kids played basketball and table tennis on it, but there was some sort of 6 foot high dividing walls, quite wide. So she knocked about 3 foot off those and turned and cut and took out the center and built and created vegetable gardens.
Brilliant.
And the veg and herbs we used in the kitchen, for school meals.
Fantastic.
The difference it made, though, because it was basically, it was very cheap. It didn't require a massive investment, but the difference in the attitude towards the kids was amazing, because they were then concerned about the basketball going on the vegetables. So they were playing slightly differently.
Well, it improves like the kids' kind of environmental literacy as well, so they start to engage with growing and how things work and the natural environment. So it's a win-win situation.
Definitely. Okay, So just one thing before we move on to what's called our eye. This project's in Warwick then. I mean, is it a primary or a secondary?
It's a primary school, so it's just started. We've got some engagement meetings starting this week. So yeah, it's early days yet, but there'll be, you know, some of the things that we used at the school in Surrey will definitely become part of the way the school develops. It's just it's becoming more kind of like more expected, really. It's what.
Yeah. Before we started, you showed us. We just want to get into this because we'll probably not have the chance. But you showed us. You did this last time you were on. You showed us some books that were quite influential. Do you want to just sort of flash those up for us?
Yes, I will do. Yeah, and I've got a list of kind of possible kind of like funding resources as well. So I'll just go through that. So one of the things they're doing at the school in Surrey is they're taking advantage of something called the Queen's Green Canopy Scheme. So each kid, when they leave the school, grows plants a sapling. So when they leave the school, the sapling grows. So there's like they've got this kind of emotional attachment to a tree as it's growing, and they're going through life.
My leaving present from my school was an oak tree planted in the field because the school had the oak tree as a badge, but didn't have a single oak tree in the grounds.
Fantastic.
And my chair of governors said, "That's fantastic, Stan. You'll be able to have your ashes scattered underneath it when you die."
There you go. There you go. That's a nice thing to hear.
Looking ahead to the future.
I was going to say though, I think in almost, well, certainly in every school I've been in, there's been a time of planting saplings and the things, but it used to be encouraged by the council because you get the local council landscapers coming in and designing. I suspect that's less and less so now because of cuts. And my first school, I'll leave on this. My first school was a brand new school, and one Friday, I think it was, they came and planted saplings all along the bank. It was absolutely fantastic. On the Monday, there were hardly any there, but the gardens of the houses near school all had new saplings in.
Yeah, I've heard that problem before.
Yeah. Go on, Nick. So some of these books and some funding
sources. So I was just going to go through this list first. So Learning Through Landscapes, it's a local school nature program. So that's useful to look at. There's something called the Ernest Cook Trust, which is more about engaging kids with outdoor activity, not necessarily in school places, but that's useful. Let's Go Zero campaign by the OVO Foundation. And also the RHS now implementing a school gardening initiative. So it might be useful to have a look at that. And the other thing as well is, so business partnerships, schools can start reaching out to businesses too. So, I mean, my business is now kind of sponsoring a photography competition at the school that we helped to design. And that's to try and engage kids with the landscape creatively and make them aware that it's been designed and that it offers great photography opportunity, and also it kind of syncs in with the photography GCSE that's happening at the school, so it kind of integrates with the syllabus. Right. So you know, just offering that as something is really helpful, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
For school, because I've seen this done before, where a school was trying to find out, why there were problems in certain geographical areas in the school, around toilets or corridors. They sent the children out with cameras. You do it with phones now, to say, take a picture of a place where you don't feel comfortable, and bring it back, and then we'll discuss it. I was thinking you could do that with the environment. Couldn't you go outside and take photographs of boring places in your school's grounds, and then you could sit with the photographs and say, well, what could this look like? What could we do?
Yes, that's interesting. So you're actually researching.
I've just given you a second project.
Yeah.
Next really year's project, Nick.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Dan. That's great.
just a small percentage.
Those books that you showed us.
Sorry, Dan. Sorry. Right. So one. Excuse me. One that's really interesting. Schools that Heal. So that's written by an American landscape architect, but she talks about sort of principles of nature and how it affects kids. and also some really interesting case studies about how nature's been incorporated in school grounds, and the effect it's had, not just on the kids, but teachers as well, because teachers love being part of really sort of progressive schools, and that their motivation is obviously it's part of a cycle. So the better, more motivated they are, the more kids get out of it. There's Nature Fix by Florence Williams. So that's quite an easy kind of conversational read in terms of how nature affects us in terms of psychology and physiologically, and just how it keys into our innate senses. So it talks about biophilia and our place in the natural systems. Also a really good book, The Well-Gardened Mind by Sue Stuart-Smith, who has taught us primarily to do with how it affects our sort of mental well-being and how it improves people's kind of focus and motivation, and some great case studies. Goes back through history in terms of, talks about how kind of our relationship with nature has developed over time. And yeah, that's a really good book. It's a bestseller, I think.
So what I'll do for people watching, and I'll put it on our website for those that are on the podcast. I'll put these at the end, actually. I think Nick's produced a list of sort of funding areas and also projects that you could perhaps, which you spoke a little bit about here, and we'll put those 3 books as well on a slide at the end. So if you want to pick up on that, there'll be a slot at the end of the video where you can grab all of this. So yeah, fascinating. And yeah, thank you so much, Nick. Let's move on. Perhaps not. Oh, well, it might be as well. I don't think it'll be quite as interesting, but it'll be a little bit varied. I think it won't all be environmental. But what's caught our eye this week? So Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
I'll try and link it via culture.
Yes, that's a good way.
What struck me this week with the revelation of WhatsApp messages and the reasons things have been released, being at least spurious, I think in some cases, is where does integrity, honesty, confidentiality, and public interest, where do those click together? And particularly in a school, where does, if you know something confidential, at what point does your integrity say this has to now be shared, even though I've said it's confidential? Or is that verboten, and can you never do that? I'm thinking of a case where we were training head teachers in mentoring each other, and at one point somebody said, everything you say in this conversation with your mentor will be confidential. And I said, well, just stop a minute, it can't be.
Yeah.
If one head teacher tells you that she keeps children in a cupboard who've misbehaved and turns the light off, you cannot say, I'm not going to report that. So some of the things you say cannot be confidential. And I just wondered, with what's gone on, somebody's passed something to somebody else in confidence, and that now, because of public interest, is now in the open. Well, everybody can read it or see it. And I wonder where that lies in school.
Yeah, I think it's also
something that others don't know.
Yeah, it's also interesting because the decision as to whether or not it's of public interest is made by an individual.
Yeah,
and that means it can vary, can't it? As if there's no real guidance determining what is and what isn't. So
I suppose whistleblowing lies in the middle of this as well.
It does.
Does integrity outrank confidentiality in terms of how you would respond? I'm stuck in both with that.
Quite difficult.
I mean, in a broader sense, there is the issue we're talking about here is this release of WhatsApp messages, I think, at the end of the day. And for me, the WhatsApp messages that are suddenly appearing in a newspaper have actually been shared with the public inquiry that's going on into COVID. So this information would have become available or could become available in the future. That's the thing that I find troubling about this. It's not. It's not quite the same. It's not quite the same.
Agreed would keep things confidential.
Yeah, true.
With photographs in the previous one, didn't it?
Yeah, true. perhaps that's why it's causing such a stir, is that none of us can really work out what the solution, well, what the right course of action was. When money's involved, it always feels bad though.
Yeah, in a school, if you're the head teacher or a senior leader, and you know, for example, that some kind of inquiry is going on about a teacher, whether it's competency or something, but it's not something that's shared, you often get that position where somebody else comes to complain and says, you know, nothing's happened, I've complained about that, and nothing, or a parent says, you've not done anything about X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
You know, lots of things are going on in the background that are confidential and you can't share. And so I just think,
do you know, but yeah, the thing for me is about judgment, who you choose to, who, I mean, a minister has chosen a fairly a journalist to, well, journalist is perhaps, you know, an interesting word, but anyway, use somebody else to co-write a book and has shared confidential information with that person. Clearly that judgment, that initial judgment of going to that person to share it, is, in the eyes of that individual, is wrong now. But it reflects, isn't it, quite poorly on the judgment making of that individual. You know, because actually there are many other journalists out there who are not as visible as the one that he chose to co-write the book with, who perhaps have got a much longer record of actually treating things in confidence, you know, and he chose not to go with them.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about judgment making.
Copies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right, let's move on. Nick, what's caught your eye this week?
So I'm staying on environmental issues. So what's caught my eye is the French climate issue with rainfall. So the fact that it's not, the French authorities are already starting to think about bringing in restrictions in terms of water usage, because there's been so little rainfall over winter, and the reservoirs haven't been restocked since the lack of rainfall last summer. So climatically, the impact is starting to be felt in very real terms already in France. And I know, for instance, you know, when I was doing site visits down south in Kent and Surrey, they had like 3 or 4 millimeters of rainfall last year. And as soon as when I was driving down, as soon as you got past Stoke, the roadsides were just brown. You know, there was an actual kind of visible change in the nature of the landscape as soon as I got past, you know, Stoke on the M6. It was amazing.
Well, I know I'm in North Wales at the moment. I think Wales has had only a quarter of its normal rainfall in the last month. You know, and you can see the effect of that actually already here on the environment where I am now. You know, little rivers are not as high. You know, when we walked up from the main road up to where we're sited, you know, there's a river that runs along through this campsite, and you know, it's a trickle.
Yeah.
Normally, here we are at the beginning of March. Mind you, as Stan says, it might all change in the next few days when the snows come.
It might do, yeah. It'll be, yeah, exactly. 2 meters of snow.
What's caught my eye is skirt lengths and toilet policies. So there's been a number of I've used the word riots, but there's been disruption in some secondary schools, and where the police have had to be called to regain order, where schools have tried to impose a particular skirt length and have actually been inspecting those skirt lengths, and there's been concern that male and female members of staff have been involved in that. But there's also the issue, which I think we've raised here before, about vaping in toilets is a major issue in many secondary schools at the moment, and schools are trying to get a grip of this, but actually what they've done is impose sort of quite strict measures where kids are not allowed to go to the toilet during lessons and this sort of thing. And that's cool. That, I think, at the end of the day, it's a shift from what was perhaps the previous policy into what the new policy is. Has been sort of done in sort of quite a sort of dramatic way. And I think there was a school I was talking about quite close where I live, where every child bag was inspected and every uniform inspected. A secondary school, this is, which meant that for some kids it took them over an hour to get into the school building. So these are, I think Stan goes to the point about culture and about where you start with this, don't you, Stan?
Yeah, my view is that if you try and introduce, I see the rules and regulations as the end point of where you need to develop. This is how we're going to live together as a group, and these are the rules we will agree on to make sure living together, working together works for all of us. But you need to start by saying, well, what sort of school do we want? What sort of staff do we want to be? What sort of student body do we want to be? How do we want to integrate those? And those conversations are long conversations, and I don't think you can start at the far end by imposing what I suspect is something that's been read or seen or done in another school successfully. Because I have a thing about where schools are running these very strict policies. They work because everybody's engaged in them and they've grown it together. You can't pick that up and drop it on another school and expect it to work. And I think also, Frank, to be fair, what's happened recently is social media and TikTok, I understand particularly, has been shared and encouraging students to object to what's going on in their schools. I think that's caused an additional edge to what's going on. But I do think it's about conversations, it's about communication, it's about establishing what works for everyone or the vast majority best first, before you go on to say, as a result, these are what we'll do.
Yeah,
I can say I did it I was a primary school, so it's probably not as difficult. I did it by saying we had rights and responsibilities. This is what the school will do. This is what the pupils will have to do. This is what parents will have to do if we are going to work together for the best of the children. And the children have the right to a good teacher, the right to a quiet classroom, but the responsibility not to disturb other people. So we had a set of scales, your rights on one side, your responsibilities on the other. And then we got the children to rewrite them, which were far, far better than our two sentences when they said, do you mean a good teacher? Yeah, that's what we mean. You've got a right to a good teacher.
Yeah.
So I just think that conversation has to take place before you can successfully say, these are the rules we're going to impose.
I also think it's interesting, the data is suggesting that it's in our minds. I think if you say to a parent or the general public, there's rioting going on, you think that the rioting is going to be led by kids of 15 and 16. But no, this rioting is from the younger secondary school age kids. That's what they've been talking about. That's where the predominance of it appears to be from the data. And in a way that makes me then reflect on whether the difference between the primary setup and the secondary setup may be playing into this as well. In effect, the primary setup where you have the same teacher, most of the time, you know how frequently the child's been to the toilet, whatever. This is a very fluid situation, isn't it, really, in terms of children being able to go to the toilet or not. But actually in secondaries, where there's that sort of different sort of approach, where you can't have kids roaming around, as you can imagine, hundreds of kids roaming around corridors with no teacher supervision. I understand all these problems, but in a way, there's that transition from primary to secondary, that there are implications, I think, which are not always appreciated, I think, by educators.
I've seen work, Frank, though, where you say you can't have hundreds of children running around, but there are times in the day when hundreds of children do all meet. And actually, there's an environmental planning issue about that. If you want to find out where the trouble is, it's where tables are stored and things are blocked. So children bang into each other, etc. But I suppose I'm a naive. I think there should be an opportunity for children to be able to get up and I think people learn better if they feel, if I need the toilet, I can go to the toilet. If I need to walk around, I've learned so much, my brain needs some time. I think we should be able to do that.
Well, Bryn Llewellyn would agree with you. The guy who was on here with Alan Davis, who wrote that book, about movement and
Yeah.
whatever, move and learn.
But it's culture and it's environment. So I will bring it back to Nick and his environment, because if the environment's right and the culture's right, you don't need to worry about children saying, I need to go to the toilet every few minutes, because you do spot that then, and you find out what the real need is for that child or that student.
Yeah.
Very easy from my point of view to sit in.
I know, in a study in Salford.
Yeah. But as far as I know, there's no riots in schools at the moment around here. But I just think where I always see trouble is where somebody's brought in
I agree with that.
Working, a new system, a new approach, and the sort of media thing on it is great. That's the way to do it. Crack down on the children, sort it out, and everyone will be happy. And I just disagree with it. I don't think there's a need for that approach.
Yeah, I think somebody said to me, what's the best advice you can give to a new head or head going into a new situation is, communicate. And if you communicate all of this effectively, then actually transition towards a new system can be done over time, and you take everybody with you. Now that sounds very idealistic.
I used to say, walk around the building, watch what's going on, see what's going on that's good, and if you see something that's disastrous, then act. But otherwise, take time to find out how the school's operating, and then slowly move it to the way you want it to operate.
Okay, right.
If only I could do that myself.
Nick, we end up the chat with we don't do the room 101 anymore, which sort of has slightly sort of negative connotations to it. So we go for something. If there's one thing you could change in education, and it can be anything, it could be personal or major, macro, micro, whatever you want it to be. Have you had a chance to think about it?
Very briefly. So I know that the government are bringing in mandatory sustainable area drainage. So I'd like to see mandatory areas of nature within school playgrounds. Natural play and just nature stuff.
Yeah.
So they could put it into, employees' requirements, or just, integrate it into existing school areas. So they could say there has to be 30 square meters of something that provides nature within school, the traditional areas of tarmac.
I wonder if there's a difference between primary and secondary in that philosophy.
Well, I mean, you've got a very different kind of set of emotional needs and physical requirements, so you do change the environment according to different ages. Definitely. Is that what you mean?
I just wondered, I can't think of a school where there isn't some kind of project to grow things outside, or to have a wooded area, or forest schools now that are taking off in a lot of primary schools, and natural areas. But I don't see many secondary schools, to be fair, but I don't see that kind of thing going on to that extent in secondary schools.
I mean, it happens incredibly well when senior leaders want that to happen really well.
Yeah.
It's my thing around digital education is exactly the same. We have, I visit some amazing world-leading schools where the head teacher and senior staff understand that the future is going to be centered around digital. And children are given loads of opportunities. It's really well thought through. But I also look at the other end of the spectrum where it's still just maths and English. And for me, I think environmental approaches is exactly the same. I can see, like the Rebecca Smiths of this world, she has that in her thinking. This is about what a good school is about. This is what it is, what it needs to provide.
I absolutely agree. Even in modern major developments, it's still all about a kind of figure leading a project and the philosophy of the project, and that filters down to all the other teams beneath that leading figure, and affects the aspirations of the project and the final outcome of the project as well.
Okay, well, it's been all environmental sustainability, all that sort of stuff. It's been great having you again, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been very enjoyable once again.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and we'll have all these links and books and whatever questions at the end of this video. So we'll let the video run for a little while so you can jot them all down or do a screenshot of it. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, Stan. Yeah, and all being well, we'll see you all next week sometime. So Stan, you're in charge of the closing of the. Don't let it go to your head.
I can't believe it. Promotion.
Power.
Cheerio,
Okay.
everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.